Hey guys, tonight, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of a journey through the cosmos or a deep dive into the human brain, we're going to travel sideways through a different kind of space. We're going to fold the tapestry of time not in a way that breaks physics, but in a way that allows us to gently step into the past. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a deep green forest. The trees are old, their roots tangled and gnarled like the knuckles of ancient hands. The air is cool and smells of damp earth and wood smoke. There are no streetlights here, no hum of electricity, just the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. This is where we're going. We're going to ask a simple yet profound question. What if you lived during the Middle Ages? It's an easy question to ask, but a difficult one to answer. The truth is, you probably wouldn't survive. Not because of knights or dragons, but because the very world you take for granted, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the understanding of how your own body works was fundamentally different. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as we begin our slow descent into the past, I'd love to know where you are right now. What's the time in your part of the world? Just drop it in the comments below. Now let's close our eyes and let the present moment slowly melt away. Let's travel back to a time when the world was both smaller and infinitely more mysterious. Tonight we begin our journey by contemplating the very fabric of our modern existence, our sense of time. We live in a world measured by the relentless ticking of a clock, a linear, quantitative, and ultimately abstract concept. We divide our days into hours, minutes, and seconds, and we experience time as a constant uniform river flowing in one direction. It is a powerful metaphor, this river, but it is a relatively recent one. If you were to wake up in a medieval village, this river would have no meaning. The very weight of time's tapestry would be different. Our modern globalized life is synchronized to the nanosecond with meetings, deadlines, and schedules that stretch across continents. But for the person in the Middle Ages, time was something you felt in your bones, not something you read on a dial. It was cyclical, not linear. The day was broken not by a clock tower's chime, but by the sun's passage across the sky. The seasons dictated the rhythm of work, of planting and harvesting, of scarcity and abundance. The year was a great wheel turning through the same cycles over and over, and life was an integral part of that wheel, not an observer of it. This fundamental difference in the perception of time is more than just a matter of convenience. It's a matter of consciousness. In our world, time is a commodity we spend, save, and waste. In their world, time was an extension of nature itself. They were a part of it, not separate from it. The sun was not merely a source of light, but a cosmic clock, its position, a universal signal to work, to pray, to rest. The concept of a lunch break at 1:00 p.m. would have been meaningless. You ate when the sun reached a certain point in the sky, or when your stomach told you it was time. There was no need for an external arbiter of time because your own internal rhythm and the rhythm of the world around you were one and the same. This raises a fascinating philosophical question. Did they experience the world more intensely because of this? Without the constant pressure of a ticking clock, did their moments stretch out full of sensory details that we in our rush so often miss? Did they notice the way the light fell on a particular leaf, or the subtle shift in the wind in a way that we can only approximate through meditation or art? The truth is, we don't really know for sure, but we can speculate that this slower, more embodied sense of time would have profound effects on the mind. To understand this, let's turn to a core scientific concept that underpins our own sense of time: entropy. In simple terms, entropy is a measure of disorder or randomness in a system. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that in a closed system, entropy always increases over time. This is why a dropped glass shatters, but the pieces never spontaneously reassemble themselves. This is the arrow of time. From a cosmic perspective, time is a measure of the universe's journey from a state of low entropy, the initial singularity of the Big Bang, to a state of high entropy, the heat-death of the universe. In our modern lives, we are acutely aware of this arrow. We feel the relentless march of time because we are constantly fighting against it. We try to keep our houses clean, our bodies healthy, and our lives organized, all of which are battles against the natural tendency towards disorder. In the Middle Ages, this battle was more direct, more visceral. Their lives were a constant struggle against the forces of nature, but their understanding of time was not a direct reflection of this. Instead of seeing time as a relentless march towards an inevitable end, they saw it as a perpetual cycle, a divine recurrence. Their calendar was a tapestry of saints' days, holy observances, and seasonal festivals, all of which served to knit the present moment into a larger eternal narrative. This perception of time woven from faith and the rhythms of the earth would have provided a psychological buffer against the feeling of decay and loss that we so often associate with the passage of time. This cyclical view of time also had a direct impact on how they experienced history. For us, history is a linear progression of events, a story with a beginning, a middle, and a present. For them, history was a repeating echo, a series of lessons and stories that were constantly being relived. The story of a saint's life was not just a historical event, but a living example to be emulated. The stories of the Bible were not just ancient texts, but a blueprint for life. This is a very different way of relating to the past. It's not a dusty record of what came before, but a living tradition that informs every aspect of your present. This deep, immersive connection to the past would have been a source of both comfort and stability in a world that was often harsh and unpredictable. It provided a sense of continuity, a feeling that you were part of a great chain stretching back to the beginning of time and forward into eternity. And here's a strange, almost poetic scientific fact that relates to this. Did you know that the perception of time can actually be a little more fluid than we think? The perception of time in the brain is not tied to a single clock, but is instead a complex symphony of different neural processes. For instance, in moments of great fear or excitement, we often experience time as slowing down. This is because the brain's emotional centers, like the amygdala, become highly active, causing us to process more information in a shorter period, creating the illusion of a prolonged moment. Conversely, when we are bored or relaxed, time seems to speed up. The medieval mind, with its slower, more rhythmic existence, may have experienced a different kind of temporal perception altogether. Perhaps their days marked by simple, repetitive tasks and a lack of external distractions felt longer, more full than our own. Maybe the time they spent in the fields, watching the clouds and listening to the wind, was a different kind of temporal experience than our hours spent staring at a screen. The modern concept of a work-life balance would have been utterly incomprehensible. There was no rigid separation between work and life. The field you tilled was a part of your life, the food you ate was a part of your life, and the people you lived with were a part of your life. All of these elements were intertwined in a dense, interconnected web. Your identity was not defined by a career, but by your place in the community, your role in the family, and your relationship to the land. You were a part of a collective, a link in the chain, not an isolated individual trying to forge a unique path. This lack of individualism, while it may seem restrictive to us, would have provided a powerful sense of belonging and purpose. There was no anxiety about finding your purpose because your purpose was already defined by the world you were born into. This sense of rootedness in time, place, and community is a powerful anchor that we have largely lost in our fast-paced, atomized world. The Middle Ages was a world of whispers and echoes of seasons and stories where the weight of time was not a burden, but a rhythm. It was a world that we, with our digital clocks and linear timelines, can barely comprehend. We've replaced the cyclical time of the sun and seasons with the abstract time of the machine, and in doing so, we've gained a great deal in terms of efficiency and control. But perhaps we've lost something too. We've lost the quiet, contemplative awareness of the slow, gentle turning of the world. We've traded the deep-felt experience of time for the shallow quantified measurement of it. And as we continue our journey, we will see that this fundamental shift in our relationship to time is just the beginning of the chasm that separates us from those who lived in this distant, strange, and beautiful world. The world of the Middle Ages was a tapestry woven with a different thread, a different rhythm, and we are just beginning to unravel its intricate pattern. Last time we began to unspool the great tapestry of time, and in doing so, we saw how a medieval mind experienced a world without clocks, where time was not a straight line, but a great turning wheel. Tonight we'll move from that profound abstract shift to a more concrete, yet equally powerful difference in perception. We're going to talk about the sky. For us, the night sky is a beautiful but largely passive spectacle. We might glance up at a full moon or notice a bright star, but for the most part, the cosmos is a distant, silent backdrop to our lives, something we observe from behind a screen or through the filtered glow of city lights. But for the person in the Middle Ages, the sky was not a backdrop. It was a character in the story of their life. It was a divine almanac, a grand clock, and a mirror of the world below. Imagine standing outside on a clear night 1,000 years ago. There is no artificial light pollution, no distant hum of highways. The sky is not just dark. It is a profound, velvety blackness, studded with an unbelievable number of stars. The Milky Way would not be a faint smudge, but a brilliant, glowing river of light, a celestial path stretching across the heavens. This wasn't just a pretty sight. It was an active and crucial source of information. The position of the stars and constellations was the primary navigation tool for sailors and travelers. The cycles of the moon dictated the tides and were used to track the months. The sun's path across the ecliptic marked the seasons, and with them, the time for planting, harvesting, and feasting. The sky was not just something to be looked at. It was something to be read like a great slow-moving book. This brings us to an interesting scientific concept, celestial mechanics. Today, we understand the movements of the planets and stars with incredible precision, thanks to the laws of gravity and the powerful tools of modern astronomy. We can predict eclipses to the second and chart the trajectories of comets with pinpoint accuracy. We see these movements as the result of a cold, deterministic, and universal set of physical laws. But to the medieval mind, the movements of the heavens were not just mechanics. They were a divine dance, a cosmic ballet orchestrated by a higher power. They believed in a geocentric model of the universe, that the Earth was the unmoving center, and all the celestial bodies, including the sun, revolved around it. This was not a foolish mistake. It was a profound and beautiful truth that placed humanity at the center of God's creation. The planets, or wandering stars, were not just rocks and gas, but were thought to be carried on crystalline spheres. Each sphere nested within the next, all of them, turning in perfect harmonious motion. This belief gave the world a sense of order, purpose, and spiritual meaning that our modern heliocentric and infinitely vast universe sometimes lacks. This is a beautiful example of how a difference in scientific understanding can lead to a completely different psychological and philosophical experience of the world. For us, the universe is a place of immense, almost terrifying scale and indifference. The Earth is a tiny, fragile speck of dust, lost in the cosmic ocean. This knowledge, while scientifically accurate, can sometimes feel alienating. But for the person in the Middle Ages, the universe was a nested, harmonious, and ordered cosmos, a home built for them by a loving creator. The planets and stars were not indifferent balls of fire and rock, but were part of a great divine machine, a symphony of spheres whose music, though inaudible to human ears, could be felt in the very rhythm of life. The very structure of the cosmos provided a sense of comfort, a feeling that you were part of a grand and meaningful design. And here's a scientific fact you might not know. Even though their model was technically incorrect, the medieval astronomers were incredibly skilled observers. They meticulously charted the movements of the planets and stars, creating detailed tables and almanacs that were surprisingly accurate for their time. They could predict the positions of planets and the timing of seasons with a precision that was essential for agriculture and religious festivals. This was all done without telescopes, relying solely on naked eye observation and simple, elegant instruments like the astrolabe. They were a bridge between the ancient world's wisdom and the coming scientific revolution, a testament to the power of careful observation and the human desire to find order in the chaos of the world. They may not have understood the underlying physics of gravity, but they understood the patterns of the heavens in a way that modern people reliant on apps and calendars simply do not. This raises another fascinating question. Did this intimate sensory connection to the heavens give them a deeper, more embodied sense of spirituality? Did watching the slow, majestic march of the constellations across the sky at night feel like a direct conversation with the divine? Did the predictable cycles of the moon feel like a personal assurance of the world's stability and God's faithfulness? The truth is, we can't know for sure what it felt like to be inside that mind, but we can surmise that their relationship with the natural world, and especially with the heavens, was far more personal and immediate than our own. Our spirituality, if we have it, is often mediated by books, buildings, and technology. Theirs was written in the stars, etched into the very sky above them. The transition from a geocentric to a heliocentric model of the universe was a monumental shift, not just in science, but in philosophy and human identity. It was a moment of profound cosmic displacement. When Copernicus and Galileo suggested that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but just one of many planets orbiting the sun, it was a deeply unsettling idea. It took away that sense of divine centrality and replaced it with a feeling of being just one small part of an unimaginably vast and perhaps indifferent machine. This shift is a perfect example of how our scientific understanding of the universe shapes our very place within it. It's not just a matter of what is true, but what truth feels like and how it shapes the story we tell ourselves about who we are and why we're here. So as you lie here, safe and warm, perhaps you can take a moment to imagine a world where the sky above was not just a ceiling, but a sacred text. A world where the stars were not just distant suns, but divine signposts, and the moon was not just a rock, but a powerful living presence that governed the rhythm of the tides and the seasons. This connection to the cosmos was a fundamental part of the medieval psyche, a feeling of being rooted in a grand and meaningful cosmic order. We have traded that feeling for a deeper scientific understanding, but perhaps in our rush to chart the universe with telescopes and equations, we have lost a little of that profound spiritual connection that comes from simply looking up and seeing a world in motion, a story written in the stars. It is a mystery that science can explain the what, but not always the why, and it leaves us with the enduring question of how our ever-expanding knowledge of the universe impacts our shrinking sense of place within it. We've journeyed through the great tapestry of time and gazed upon a sky without clocks. Tonight, we'll turn our attention inward to a sense we so often take for granted, our sense of hearing. We live in a world of constant sound, the hum of a refrigerator, the distant drone of traffic, the endless electronic notifications that ping and buzz. We are bathed in a ceaseless symphony of man-made noise, a background radiation of sound that we've become so accustomed to, we barely even notice it. But if you were to step back into the Middle Ages, you would be entering a world of profound silence. Imagine a world where the loudest mechanical sound is the creak of a mill wheel or the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. A world without the constant thrum of motors or the insistent blare of car horns. The soundscape of a medieval village was dictated by the natural world and the rhythms of human labor. You would hear the crowing of roosters at dawn, the chirping of crickets at dusk, the lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the fields. The human sounds would be just as essential: the laughter of children, the singing of women at the well, the rhythmic chant of a work song, the tolling of a church bell. The silence would not be empty. It would be full, rich, and layered with meaning. This leads us to a fascinating scientific concept: that touches on both biology and history, the auditory cortex and its role in perception. The auditory cortex is the part of our brain that processes sound. In a modern brain, it's constantly working to filter out the noise to identify important signals amidst the endless background clutter. We've evolved to become experts at tuning out the irrelevant. We can carry on a conversation in a crowded coffee shop, for instance, by mentally pushing the surrounding chatter to the background. But what would happen to an auditory cortex that didn't need to do that? What would a brain sound like in a world where every sound was a signal? Where the silence was not something to be filled, but something to be listened to? The silence of the Middle Ages would have profoundly affected perception. Without the constant sensory overload, the brain would have been free to notice a subtler, more intricate layer of reality. A person living in a pre-industrial world would have been able to hear the approach of a distant rider by the sound of hooves on the dirt road, long before they saw them. They would be able to distinguish between the different songs of birds and know what each one signified. They would hear the subtle changes in the wind and be able to predict the weather. The silence would have been a canvas upon which every small sound was painted with incredible detail and clarity. This is not just a poetic idea. It's a matter of neurological wiring. The less noise you have, the more sensitive your brain becomes to the sounds that are there. We know that people who live in quiet, natural environments have a much greater ability to distinguish between different types of animal calls and natural sounds than people who live in cities. The medieval person would have been the ultimate sound naturalist, their brain an incredibly fine-tuned instrument, constantly listening. This raises a question that has no easy answer. Did they think in a different way because of this? We often think in a kind of internal monologue, a stream of language that is constantly running in our heads. But in a world where information was not consumed through silent reading, but through oral traditions, stories told around a fire, songs sung in the fields, would their internal lives have been more auditory? Would they have heard their thoughts more than we see them? Would the language of their dreams have been a tapestry of whispers and echoes, or rather than a silent film? The truth is, we don't really know, but it's a beautiful idea to contemplate. The very structure of their consciousness, the way their minds processed and organized the world, may have been fundamentally different from our own. And here's a scientific fact that is both beautiful and a little strange. Did you know that the ear is constantly listening even when we're asleep? The brain has a remarkable ability to process sound, even in a state of unconsciousness. This is why a mother can sleep through a loud storm, but be woken by the faint cry of her baby. The brain is running a kind of silent sentry duty, constantly scanning for signals of importance. In the Middle Ages, with its rich tapestry of meaningful sounds and profound silences, this kind of unconscious processing would have been even more important. The rustle of a predator in the underbrush, the changing note in the wind that signaled a coming storm. These would have been important signals that their brains, even in sleep, were attuned to. Their bodies and minds would have been in a constant, subtle conversation with the world around them. The great cathedrals of the Middle Ages, with their soaring arches and incredible acoustics, were not just places of worship. They were places designed to amplify and transform sound. The Gregorian chants that filled these spaces were a sonic landscape, a way of using sound to create a sense of the divine. The sound would echo and linger, washing over the listeners, creating a powerful, immersive experience. This was a deliberate and sophisticated use of sound to shape consciousness, to create a feeling of awe and connection. It was a kind of spiritual technology, a way of using the physics of sound to connect the human to the divine. The lack of mass literacy meant that knowledge was stored in people, not in books. It was passed from one generation to the next through stories and songs. The bard, the storyteller, was a living library, a keeper of history and wisdom. Their words, spoken aloud in a quiet room, would have carried a weight and a power that is hard for us to imagine. We are so used to the silent consumption of information, reading a book, watching a video, that we have lost touch with the power of the spoken word. The medieval person's world was a world where words had a physical presence, a sound and a rhythm that was a part of their meaning. It was a world where a whisper could carry great weight and a shout could change the course of a life. So as you lie there tonight, enveloped in the subtle hum of your modern world, I invite you to close your eyes and listen. Listen past the refrigerator and the distant traffic. See if you can hear the silence between the lines, the profound stillness that lies just beneath the surface of our noisy world. Perhaps in that quiet place you can catch a faint echo of a different time, a time when a human being was a part of a much larger, more intricate conversation with the world. A conversation not just of words and thoughts, but of wind, of water, of animal calls, and of the profound, powerful silence that held it all together. We've listened to the silence of the Middle Ages, a quiet world where every sound was a signal. Tonight, we'll move from the unseen sounds to the unseen things, to a world we now know is teeming with life, but which to the medieval mind was a complete and utter mystery. We're going to talk about the world of microorganisms, the invisible universe in a drop of water, and what it meant to live in a world without germ theory. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a well. The water looks clear and cool, a shimmering mirror reflecting the sky. You dip your bucket and drink, and for a moment, you feel refreshed. But what you don't know is that in that single drop of water, there is a universe of life, a bustling, chaotic, and often deadly world of bacteria, viruses, and parasites. This world was completely invisible to the medieval eye. They had no microscopes, no understanding of epidemiology, no concept that a tiny unseen organism could be the cause of a plague that could wipe out a third of the population. Their explanations for disease were based on theories of divine punishment, bad air, or an imbalance of the body's four humors: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These theories, while incorrect, were a sincere attempt to find order and meaning in a world of suffering that seemed to have no earthly cause. This leads us to a central scientific concept that defines our modern world: germ theory. In simple terms, germ theory states that many diseases are caused by microorganisms. It's a revolutionary idea that changed everything. It gave us the power to understand, to prevent, and to cure diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. But to the medieval mind, this concept would have been as fantastical as the idea of walking on the moon. The idea that a tiny invisible creature could be the source of a terrible fever or a painful swelling would have been incomprehensible. The world they lived in was one of magic and mystery, where illness was a cruel fate or a supernatural curse, not a biological reality. To help us understand the chasm that separates us, let's use a metaphor. Imagine the human body is a great walled city. We in the modern world know that this city has an invisible enemy, tiny saboteurs, that can sneak through the walls and cause chaos. We have a sanitation department that keeps the streets clean, a water treatment plant that purifies our drinking supply, and an entire army of doctors and scientists who understand the enemy's tactics. We have fences, alarms, and a constant awareness of the threat. The medieval city, however, had none of this. The city's walls were strong, but the gates were wide open to a hidden enemy they couldn't even see. The people of this city knew something was wrong when people got sick, but they didn't know why. They would blame the gods or the stars or their neighbors, all the while unaware that the true enemy was in the water. They drank the food they ate and the air they breathed. This lack of understanding had profound and often tragic consequences. Simple cuts could turn into deadly infections. A toothache could lead to a fatal abscess. The lack of proper sanitation meant that waste was often disposed of in the streets or in rivers, contaminating the very water sources people relied on. The absence of a basic understanding of hygiene meant that the simplest of actions, like washing hands before preparing food, were not seen as necessary. The body was a beautiful but fragile vessel, and without the shield of germ theory, it was constantly under siege. Here's a strange and little-known scientific fact that hints at the coming revolution. Even without understanding germ theory, some people made connections that were remarkably prescient. For instance, in the 14th century, a Venetian law was passed requiring ships arriving from plague-stricken ports to anchor for 40 days before landing. The word for 40 days is 40 giorni in Italian, which is where we get our word quarantine. They didn't know about viruses or bacteria, but they did know through careful observation that somehow waiting prevented the spread of disease. It was an empirical solution to a biological problem they could not yet name. It was a beautiful example of human ingenuity and a testament to the power of observation in the face of an impossible mystery. This raises a poignant question. Did their ignorance of germ theory allow them to have a different kind of relationship with suffering? When disease was seen as an act of God or a stroke of fate, did it allow them to find meaning in their suffering that we, with our cold scientific explanations, sometimes struggle to find? Did a fatal illness not just destroy the body, but also become a kind of spiritual pilgrimage, a chance to reconcile with God and the cosmos? The truth is, we don't know. Our modern understanding, while it gives us power and control, can also strip away some of that deeper, more spiritual meaning. We have traded mystery for medicine, and perhaps in that trade, we have lost a little of the sacred. The absence of germ theory meant that their lives were lived on a razor's edge. The line between health and sickness, between life and death, was thin and unpredictable. A simple fever could be a harbinger of death, and a tiny wound could be a sentence. This constant state of vulnerability would have shaped their worldview in profound ways. It would have made them more reliant on faith, on community, and on the wisdom of those who had survived. It would have made them acutely aware of the fragility of life and the preciousness of every single day. We, with our antibiotics and vaccines, live with a kind of health security that would have been unimaginable to them. We assume we will wake up tomorrow, that a cut will heal, that a fever will pass. They had no such guarantees. They lived in a world where the unseen was not just a theoretical concept, but a palpable, terrifying presence. A world where a sneeze was not just a sneeze, but a potential harbinger of doom. We've traveled through a silent world, and we've peered into the unseen universe of a single drop of water. Tonight, our journey takes us to the world outside, to the forest and the field, and to a connection with nature that we have largely forgotten. We're going to talk about the seasons, the sun, and the lost rhythm of a life lived in harmony with the earth. Imagine waking up to the dawn, not because an alarm clock tells you it's time, but because the first light of day is filtering through a small window. Your body would not be on a schedule dictated by work hours, but by the sun's journey across the sky. The length of the day would be your primary timekeeper, a living, breathing calendar that tells you when to work, when to rest, and when to sleep. The seasons would not be a theoretical concept marked on a calendar app. They would be a visceral reality that shaped your entire life. Winter would mean a scarcity of food, a reliance on preserved goods, and long dark hours spent huddled around a fire. Spring would bring a sense of renewal, a return to the fields, and the first taste of new growth. Summer would be a time of intense labor, of long days under the sun, and of the promise of a bountiful harvest. Autumn would be a time of reaping, of feasting, and of preparing for the long cold months to come. This brings us to a crucial scientific concept that underpins our modern existence, and that the medieval person would have understood on a deep intuitive level: circadian rhythms. Our bodies have an internal biological clock that regulates our sleep-wake cycles, hormone production, and a host of other physiological processes. This clock is primarily synchronized by light, specifically the light from the sun. Our modern world, with its artificial lighting shift, work, and late-night screens, has thrown this internal clock into chaos. We can override the natural signals of our bodies with the flick of a switch. But for the medieval person, this internal clock would have been in perfect synchrony with the external world. They went to bed when it was dark and woke up when it was light. This natural rhythm would have led to a kind of health and wellness that we, with our sleep-deprived, overstimulated lives, can only dream of. The lack of artificial light meant that night was truly dark. The moon and the stars were the only light sources outside of a fire or a candle. This profound darkness would have created a different kind of sleep. We know from scientific research that exposure to bright light at night suppresses the production of melatonin, a hormone that helps regulate sleep. The medieval person would have had no such problem. Their sleep would have been deeper, more restorative, and more in tune with their body's natural needs. It is believed that medieval people often experienced a segmented sleep pattern where they would sleep for a few hours, wake up for a couple of hours in the middle of the night to tend to a fire prey or work on a small task, and then go back to sleep for a second time until dawn. This pattern, which we might consider a sleep disorder, was likely a natural response to the long dark nights of a pre-electrical world. And here's a beautiful, yet unsettling scientific fact that reveals just how intertwined their lives were with nature. Did you know that exposure to natural light and seasonal changes can affect our mood and mental health? A lack of sunlight can lead to seasonal affective disorder, a form of depression that is directly linked to the changing seasons. The medieval person who spent their days outside would have had an intense, almost primal connection to the sun. The warmth of a summer day would not have just been a physical sensation. It would have been a psychological one, a feeling of being a part of a larger living world. They would have felt the sun's absence in the winter not just as a physical cold, but as a deep psychic change. Their mental and emotional lives were in a constant dance with the Earth's cycles. This raises a poignant question. Have we, in our quest to control nature, lost something essential? We can now grow food in hothouses in the dead of winter and light up our homes so that it's always day. But in doing so, we have severed our connection to the subtle, powerful rhythms of the natural world. The taste of a fresh strawberry in July is no longer a precious, fleeting gift of the season. It's just a commodity available year-round. The darkness of winter is no longer a time for quiet reflection and rest. It's just a time to turn on more lights. The medieval person, with their intimate connection to the Earth's seasons, would have a sense of time and place that we can only approximate through a conscious effort to disconnect from our modern world. They lived in a garden of forgotten senses, a world where the earth itself was their clock, their calendar, and their teacher. This deep connection to the land and its cycles would have given them a powerful sense of rootedness and belonging. Your identity was not just a matter of your name or your profession. It was a matter of the land you worked, the food you grew, and the seasons you lived through. You were a part of the soil itself, a link in a chain that stretched back to your ancestors and forward to your children. This is a very different kind of identity than the one we have today, which is often defined by our careers, our hobbies, and our online personas. The medieval identity was not something you chose. It was something you were a part of, something that was grown from the earth itself. As we lie here tonight, bathed in the soft glow of our screens, I invite you to remember the world outside. Remember the changing colors of the leaves, the taste of fresh rain, the feeling of the sun on your skin. These are not just sensory details. They are echoes of a different time, a time when our lives were a constant conversation with the natural world, a conversation that in our modern world we have largely forgotten how to have. We've felt the rhythms of the seasons and the sun, a lost connection to the natural world. Tonight, we'll turn our attention to the body itself, to the physical reality of living in a time without our modern comforts. We're going to talk about the stone and the shadow, the flesh and the bone, and how the human body would have adapted to a life of constant, demanding labor. Imagine your body as a kind of tool, a living instrument, constantly being shaped and hardened by its use. In the Middle Ages, there was no such thing as a desk job for the vast majority of the population. Life was a physical undertaking. You would have spent your days in the fields, tilling the soil, or in a workshop hammering metal, or in a home spinning wool and hauling water. There were no machines to do the heavy lifting, no easy solutions to the physical demands of daily survival. Your body would have been your most essential piece of equipment. and it would have borne the marks of that reality. Calloused hands, a strong back, legs hardened by walking miles a day, these would be the universal signs of a life lived. The body would have been lean and powerful, not from hours spent in a gym, but from the simple, relentless demands of existence. This brings us to a fascinating scientific concept that bridges genetics and environment epigenetics. We often think of our genes as a fixed blueprint, an unchangeable set of instructions that we are born with. But epigenetics is the study of how our environment and our behaviors can cause changes that affect the way our genes work. It's like a dimmer switch for your genes, turning some up and some down without changing the fundamental blueprint itself. The constant physical labor of the Middle Ages would have been a powerful epigenetic force. The stress of physical work, the limited diet, and the exposure to the elements would have written a kind of story onto their very DNA. Genes related to muscle strength and energy metabolism might have been turned on, while others related to modern diseases of sedentary life might have been turned down. Their bodies would have been in a constant state of adaptation, a physical conversation with their environment. The absence of modern sanitation and medicine would have also shaped the body in profound ways. We've already talked about the lack of germ theory, but this reality meant that even a minor injury could be a serious threat. A simple cut on your hand from a farm tool could lead to a fatal infection. There were no antibiotics, no antiseptic wipes, no hospital emergency rooms. The body's own immune system was the front line of defense, and it was constantly being tested. This would have led to a kind of natural selection, where those with stronger, more resilient immune systems were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. Their bodies would have been a testament to a life lived on the edge, a beautiful but fragile expression of human resilience. And here's a scientific fact that is both a little grim and deeply fascinating. Did you know that the average height of people in the Middle Ages was significantly shorter than it is today? The average height for men in England in the early Middle Ages was around 5 feet 6 inches, and for women, it was around 5 feet 1 inch. This wasn't due to genetics alone, but was a direct result of chronic malnutrition disease and the intense physical demands of their lives. The body, in its incredible wisdom, would prioritize survival over growth. It would expend its limited energy on essential functions, leaving less for the luxury of a few extra inches. The difference in our average height today is a silent monument to the advances in nutrition, sanitation, and medicine that we so often take for granted. This raises a compelling question. Did the physical hardship of their lives lead to a different kind of mental and emotional resilience? We often complain about minor inconveniences, about a slow internet connection or a long commute. But for a medieval person, a bad harvest could mean starvation, and a cold winter could mean death. Their lives were a constant negotiation with the very forces of survival. This would have given them a kind of toughness, a mental fortitude that is hard for us to comprehend. They lived with the knowledge that life was fragile and fleeting, and this would have shaped their philosophy, their religion, and their relationship with each other. They were bound together by a shared struggle, a communal effort to simply survive. The physical landscape of the Middle Ages, with its lack of roads, its dense forests, and its impassable rivers, would have also shaped the body's movements. People would have walked not for exercise, but because it was the only way to get from one place to another. Their legs would have been strong, their posture upright, and their bodies would have moved with a kind of grace that comes from constant natural motion. They would have been experts in their own environment, able to read the terrain, to find a path through a forest, and to navigate by the stars. The body and the mind would have been in a constant active dialogue with the world around them. We, in our modern world, have traded this embodied knowledge for the convenience of a GPS and the comfort of a car, and in doing so, we have lost a little of that primal connection to our own physical selves. We've explored the hardened bodies and resilient minds of the Middle Ages, shaped by a world of stone and flesh. Tonight we'll move from the physicality of life to its artistry, to a world where every object told a story, where the very act of making was a kind of prayer. We're going to talk about the language of the loom, the hammer and the chisel, and the lost art of the tactile world. Imagine a world without mass production. Every object you owned, your clothes, your tools, your furniture, was either made by you or by someone you knew. The shirt on your back was spun from wool woven on a loom and sewn by hand. The table you ate at was carved from a tree that grew nearby. There was no plastic, no synthetic materials, no planned obsolescence. Every object had a history, a memory of the hands that had made it. This was a world of profound craftsmanship, where the skill of a person was not measured by their salary, but by the quality of the things they created. The blacksmith, the weaver, the potter, the carpenter. These were not just professions, they were identities, and the objects they made were an extension of their very being. This leads us to a fascinating scientific concept that touches on the connection between the mind and the hands, cognitive science, and the nature of skill acquisition. We often think of intelligence as something that resides solely in the brain, but cognitive science tells us that intelligence is distributed throughout the body and the environment. The skill of a master craftsman is not just a matter of mental knowledge, but of muscle memory of the subtle feedback loop between the hands, the tools, and the material. The potter's hands knew the feel of the clay, the weaver's fingers knew the tension of the threads, and the blacksmith's arm knew the precise moment to strike the hot metal. This was a kind of embodied knowledge, a deep intuitive understanding that could not be taught from a book. It had to be learned through years of practice, through a constant tactile conversation with the physical world. The lack of mass-produced goods meant that every object was a unique artifact. The imperfections and idiosyncrasies of a handmade tool were not a sign of poor quality, but a sign of its history, a testament to the hands that had shaped it. There was a kind of beauty in this imperfection, a feeling of aliveness that our modern perfectly uniform objects lack. When you used a handmade tool, you were not just using a piece of equipment. You were using a piece of someone's life, a physical representation of their skill, their effort, and their humanity. This created a deep emotional connection between people and the things they owned. They didn't just have objects, they had companions. And here's a scientific fact that is both beautiful and a little strange. Did you know that learning a complex manual skill can actually change the physical structure of your brain? Research has shown that musicians, for instance, have a larger and more active auditory cortex, and that people who learn to juggle can increase the amount of gray matter in parts of their brain related to visual motor coordination. The constant, repetitive, and demanding physical skills of the Middle Ages would have physically reshaped their brains. The brain of a medieval carpenter would have been wired to understand the geometry of wood in a way that we, with our calculators and digital tools, can only approximate. Their brains would have been a living map of their skills, a testament to a life spent making and doing. This raises a poignant question, have we, in our rush for convenience, lost a part of our own humanity? We have replaced the tactile pleasure of making with the sterile ease of buying. We've traded the deep embodied knowledge of a skill for the shallow fleeting satisfaction of instant gratification. The medieval person with their hands constantly engaged in the creation of a tangible object would have had a profound sense of purpose and meaning. They were not just consumers, they were creators. They were not just a part of the economy, they were a part of the creation. They lived in a world where the things you made were a reflection of who you were, and the things you owned were a story of the hands that had made them. The great cathedrals of the Middle Ages, with their intricate stained glass and their soaring arches, were not just a testament to faith. They were a testament to the power of human craftsmanship. Each stone was carved by hand, each window was assembled piece by piece, and each detail was a physical act of devotion. These buildings were a kind of collective memory, a story told in stone and glass, a testament to a time when the human hand and the human mind were in a constant, beautiful, and demanding conversation. They were a physical representation of the language of the loom, the hammer, and the chisel, a language that we have largely forgotten how to speak. We've felt the wisdom of the hands and the language of the loom. Tonight, our journey takes us from the physical world of objects to the internal world of the mind, to a time when knowledge was not stored on a shelf or a screen, but in a person's memory. We're going to talk about the library within the mind and the profound effects of living in a world without mass literacy or the printed word. Imagine a world where books are a rare and precious commodity owned only by the church and the very wealthy. The vast majority of the population could not read or write. This wasn't a sign of ignorance. It was simply the reality of a pre-Gutenberg world. The absence of the printed word meant that information was passed from one person to another through stories, songs, and oral traditions. History was not a dusty record in a book. It was a living story told around a fire at night, passed down from a grandfather to a grandson. A song wasn't just for entertainment. It was a way of remembering a hero's life or a great battle. The mind was the ultimate storage device, the only library most people would ever know. This leads us to a fascinating scientific concept that sheds light on the very nature of human thought memory consolidation. Memory consolidation is the process by which a new memory is made stable and permanent in the brain. It's a complex process that involves the hippocampus and the cerebral cortex, and it's heavily influenced by emotion repetition and our engagement with the information. In a world of oral tradition, these processes would have been running at full throttle. When a story was told, it was not just a passive reception of information. It was an active emotional and social event. The storyteller would use their voice, their gestures, and their rhythm to make the story come alive. The listener would not just hear the words, they would feel them, and in doing so, the information would be more deeply embedded in their memory. The lack of literacy meant that the mind's reliance on external memory aids like notebooks and now computers would have been non-existent. A medieval person would have a much more powerful and trained memory than we do. They would have been able to recite long poems, remember the genealogies of their family, and recall the details of complex stories with a precision that we find remarkable. Their minds would have been a kind of living theater, a place where stories and information were not just stored, but performed. This is a very different kind of intelligence than the one we value today, which is often based on the ability to find and process information quickly, rather than the ability to store and recall it. And here's a scientific fact that is both beautiful and a little strange. Did you know that the act of writing things down can actually be a kind of memory aid? But not in the way you might think. Studies have shown that when we write something down by hand, we are more likely to remember it than if we type it. This is because the physical act of writing, the formation of the letters, and the sensory feedback from the pen on the paper creates a deeper neural pathway. The medieval person's world was a world of spoken words, and that too had a kind of physical presence. A word spoken was a sound wave, a vibration in the air, a physical event that was more deeply connected to memory than a word silently read. This raises a profound philosophical question. Did a reliance on oral tradition and a powerful memory lead to a different kind of self-identity? Our modern identity is often built on the unique collection of books we've read, the ideas we've encountered in print, and the information we've absorbed from a vast and impersonal external world. The medieval identity was built on a much smaller, more personal, and more communal set of information. Your identity was not just a matter of who you were, but who you were a part of. You were a link in the chain of a long oral tradition. The stories you knew were the stories your family and community knew. This would have given them a powerful sense of rootedness and belonging that our modern individualized minds often lack. We have traded the deep communal well of shared stories for the vast but often shallow ocean of global information. The great cathedrals, the stained glass windows, and the statues were also a form of literacy for a non-literate population. They were a visual library, a way of telling the stories of the Bible and the lives of the saints to a people who could not read them in a book. The images were a kind of mnemonic, a powerful visual aid that helped people remember the core tenets of their faith. The very architecture of their world was designed to be a memory palace, a living, breathing library of stone and light. We've journeyed into the mind's library, a place where stories and knowledge were preserved, not on paper, but in memory. Tonight we turn from the mind to the body and to the mysterious and often misunderstood world of medieval medicine. We're going to talk about the apothecary's whisper and the body's riddle, and the profound difference in how they understood what it meant to be sick and what it meant to be healed. Imagine you have a headache. In our modern world, we might reach for a pill, a scientifically formulated chemical compound designed to block a specific pain signal in the brain. We trust in the science, the double-blind studies, and the peer-reviewed research that stands behind that pill. But if you were to have that same headache in the Middle Ages, your approach to healing would be completely different. You might go to the village apothecary, who would offer you a tincture made from herbs and roots, or perhaps a local healer who might suggest a prayer, a pilgrimage, or a charm. The cure was not a matter of pure chemistry, but of a complex blend of natural remedies, spiritual belief, and the mysterious forces of the body itself. This leads us to a fascinating scientific concept that bridges psychology and biology, the placebo effect. The placebo effect is a powerful and mysterious phenomenon where a person's symptoms improve not because of the active properties of a treatment, but because of their belief in the treatment. If you are given a sugar pill, but are told it is a powerful painkiller, your brain can release its own natural pain-relieving chemicals, and you may genuinely feel better. The medieval person's world was a world where the placebo effect was not a scientific curiosity. It was the very engine of medicine. A healing ritual, a prayer, or a cup of herbal tea, given with sincerity and confidence, could have a powerful and very real effect on the body. The mind's belief in the cure was often the most powerful medicine of all. The medieval understanding of the body was based on a theory of the four humors. They believed that the body was made up of four fundamental fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that a person's health and temperament were determined by the balance of these humors. An excess of black bile, for instance, could lead to melancholy. An excess of blood could lead to a fiery, sanguine temperament. The job of the physician was not to fight a disease, but to restore the balance of the humors. This could be done through a variety of methods, including herbal remedies, diet, and even bloodletting. While this theory was scientifically incorrect, it was a coherent and elegant model of the human body that provided a framework for understanding and treating illness. It gave them a sense of control over their health in a world that was often chaotic and unpredictable. And here's a scientific fact that is both beautiful and a little unsettling. Did you know that the very act of a doctor showing empathy and confidence can have a profound effect on a patient's outcome? Studies have shown that when a doctor takes the time to listen, to explain, and to show genuine care, patients often report less pain, heal faster, and have better overall health outcomes. This is a kind of modern placebo effect, a subtle reminder that medicine is not just a matter of chemistry and biology, but of human connection and trust. The medieval healer, with their close personal relationship with the community, would have been an expert in this kind of healing. They knew the patient's life, their family, their fears, and their beliefs, and this deep personal knowledge was an essential part of the healing process. This raises a fascinating question. Did a lack of scientific knowledge make them more attuned to the mind-body connection? Without the cold clinical language of modern medicine, they had to rely on a more holistic and perhaps more intuitive understanding of what it meant to be a person. They saw the body not just as a machine to be fixed, but as a complex and mysterious whole, where physical ailments were often a reflection of a spiritual or emotional imbalance. We, in our modern world, are just beginning to rediscover this ancient wisdom, to understand that our mental and emotional lives have a profound effect on our physical health. We are starting to learn that a stressed mind can lead to a sick body, and that a peaceful mind can be a powerful catalyst for healing. The apothecary, with their shelves of dried herbs, their mortars and pestles, and their mysterious recipes, was a kind of proto-scientist, a master of a kind of botanical chemistry. They would have known which plants to use for a fever, which for a sore joint, and which for a troubled mind. Their knowledge was not based on laboratory experiments, but on generations of empirical observation, a kind of collective wisdom passed down from one person to the next. It was a beautiful and fragile kind of knowledge, one that was constantly being tested and refined by the harsh realities of a world without modern medicine. We've explored the apothecary's whisper and the powerful connection between mind and body. Tonight, we turn from the body's ailments to its sustenance to the fundamental reality of eating in the Middle Ages. We're going to talk about a feast of earth and fire and the profound connection between food, the land, and the microbial world that we are only now beginning to truly understand. Imagine a world where your food does not come from a grocery store, but from the land around you. Your diet would be a direct reflection of the seasons and the local environment. In the summer, you might eat fresh greens from the garden and berries from the forest. In the autumn, you would feast on the harvest grains, root vegetables, and preserved meats. In the long cold winter, you would rely on dried beans, salted fish, and pickled vegetables. There were no global supply chains, no bananas in December, and no coffee from a distant continent. Your food was a physical, palpable link to the soil you worked and the climate you lived in. It was a kind of communion with the earth itself. This leads us to a fascinating scientific concept that has revolutionized our understanding of health, the gut microbiome. Our intestines are home to trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, and fungi that play a crucial role in our digestion, immune system, and even our mental health. We are not just a collection of human cells. We are a walking ecosystem. The diet of the Middle Ages, rich in fermented foods like sourdough bread, cheese, and beer, and low in processed sugars and artificial ingredients, would have been a powerful force in shaping a healthy and diverse gut microbiome. The act of fermentation was not just a way to preserve food. It was a way of engaging with a microbial world that they could not see but could taste and feel. It was a kind of living technology that transformed raw ingredients into a more digestible and nutritious form. The process of making sourdough bread, for instance, is a beautiful example of this. The baker would not use a packet of commercial yeast, but would instead capture wild yeast from the air and the flour itself, creating a starter that was a living, breathing part of the local microbial environment. The starter would be passed down from generation to generation, a kind of living legacy that connected a family to its past. The bread that came from this starter would be a unique and flavorful expression of the local environment, a kind of microbial signature of a particular place. This is a very different kind of food than our modern mass-produced bread, which is often made with a single uniform strain of yeast in a sterile factory. And here's a scientific fact that is both a little gross and deeply fascinating. Did you know that the microorganisms in our gut can actually communicate with our brain? This is a concept known as the gut-brain axis, and it's a new and exciting area of research. We now know that the bacteria in our gut can produce neurotransmitters and other chemicals that influence our mood, our anxiety levels, and our cognitive function. The medieval person, with their diverse and probiotic-rich diet, may have had a kind of microbial wisdom that we have largely lost. Their gut, in its healthy and balanced state, may have been a source of not just physical health, but mental and emotional well-being as well. This raises a poignant question. Have we, in our quest for a clean and sterile world, gone too far? We have traded the rich microbial tapestry of fermented and wild foods for the convenience of shelf-stable pasteurized products. We have made our food safer, but perhaps we have also made it less alive. The medieval person's diet was a kind of constant low-level conversation with the microbial world, a conversation that strengthened their immune system and enriched their lives. We have largely silenced that conversation, and in doing so, we have created a kind of microbial loneliness, a gut that is starved for diversity and connection. The communal aspect of food was also a central part of medieval life. A feast was not just a meal. It was a social event, a time for the community to come together to celebrate a successful harvest, a wedding, or a religious holiday. The food on the table was a direct result of the collective labor of the community, a physical representation of their shared struggle and their shared triumph. The act of eating together was a powerful ritual that reinforced social bonds and a sense of belonging. The modern act of eating, often done alone in front of a screen, is a very different kind of experience. We have traded the communal feast for the individual meal, and in doing so, we have lost a little of that deep social connection that food once provided. We've tasted the food of the earth and understood its microbial dance. Tonight, we'll move from the physical to the metaphysical, from the plate to the pew, and to the central all-encompassing role of faith in the Middle Ages. We're going to talk about the architecture of belief and how religion was not just a part of life, but was the very framework upon which life was built. Imagine a world without science as we know it. There was no germ theory, no heliocentric model, and no understanding of the vast and different universe. The world was a place of profound mystery and often terrifying uncertainty. The seasons were a matter of divine grace. A bad harvest could be a sign of God's wrath, and a plague could be a punishment for humanity's sins. In a world with so little control over their own lives, faith was not a choice. It was a necessity. It was the only available explanation for the inexplicable, the only source of comfort in the face of suffering, and the only hope for salvation in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. This leads us to a fascinating sociological concept: shared belief systems. A shared belief system is a set of ideas, values, and practices that are held in common by a group of people, and that provide a framework for understanding the world and their place in it. For the medieval person, this belief system was the Catholic Church. The church was not just a building you went to on Sunday. It was the government, the school, the hospital, and the social hub of the community. It provided a sense of order and meaning that permeated every aspect of life. The day was broken up by the ringing of church bells, and the year was structured around religious holidays and saints' days. The stories of the Bible and the lives of the saints were the primary narratives that shaped their moral and ethical compass. The church was the ultimate source of authority, and its teachings were the bedrock of their reality. The great cathedrals of the Middle Ages were a physical manifestation of this belief system. They were not just buildings. They were a kind of spiritual technology designed to evoke a sense of awe and reverence. The soaring arches, the intricate stained glass windows, and the ethereal light that filtered through them were all meant to lift the human spirit from the earthly realm to the divine. The architecture itself was a kind of sermon, a physical representation of the glory of God and the promise of heaven. The act of entering a cathedral was a kind of pilgrimage, a journey from the profane to the sacred. And here's a scientific fact that is both beautiful and a little strange. Did you know that the act of a group of people singing together can actually synchronize their heartbeats and brainwaves? Studies have shown that when people sing in a choir, their bodies fall into a kind of biological rhythm, creating a powerful feeling of unity and connection. The Gregorian chants and the hymns that filled the cathedrals of the Middle Ages would have been a kind of collective meditation, a way of using sound to create a shared embodied spiritual experience. It was a kind of spiritual technology that bound people together not just in belief, but in a kind of physical and biological communion. This raises a profound question. Have we, in our modern secular world, lost the power of shared belief? We have replaced the grand narrative of faith with a multitude of competing narratives. The narratives of science, of politics, of consumerism. We have gained a great deal in terms of individual freedom and intellectual inquiry, but perhaps we have lost a little of that profound sense of belonging and shared purpose that comes from being a part of a larger collective story. The medieval person's faith, while it may seem simple and superstitious to us, was a powerful anchor in a world of chaos. It gave them a sense of meaning and purpose that we in our modern world are often desperately searching for. The belief in an afterlife, in a heaven and a hell, was also a powerful force in shaping behavior. The fear of eternal damnation and the hope of eternal salvation were not abstract concepts. They were a very real and present reality that shaped their daily decisions. It was a kind of moral compass that was enforced not by a police officer, but by the watchful eye of God. This is a very different kind of morality than our modern secular morality, which is often based on the principles of law and social contract. The medieval morality was a morality of the soul, and it was a powerful force for both good and for ill. It could inspire acts of profound charity and courage, but it could also justify acts of cruelty and persecution. It was a powerful and double-edged sword, and it was the very engine of their world. We've stepped inside the architecture of belief, a world built on faith. Tonight we'll move from the visual and structural to the oral and ephemeral, to the songs and stories that were the very lifeblood of the medieval mind. We're going to talk about the echoes of a distant song and how music and storytelling were not just forms of entertainment, but were the primary way of preserving history, transmitting culture, and making sense of the world. Imagine a world without books, movies, or recorded music. The only way to experience a story or a song was to be in the presence of someone telling or singing it. A village feast would not be complete without a bard or a storyteller who would stand before the fire and weave tales of ancient heroes, mythical beasts, and the lives of the saints. These stories were not just for pleasure. They were a form of education, a moral compass, and a communal memory. The tales were often told in a rhythmic, poetic form, which made them easier to remember and to pass on from one generation to the next. The song, with its melody and its meter, was a kind of living archive, a way of preserving the past in a world without written records. This leads us to a fascinating scientific concept that touches on psychology and neuroscience: narrative transportation. Narrative transportation is the psychological process where a person becomes so immersed in a story that they lose track of their own reality and feel as if they are a part of the narrative. It's the feeling of being lost in a good book or movie. The medieval person, with their reliance on oral storytelling, would have been an expert in this kind of immersive experience. The storyteller, with their voice, their gestures, and their ability to connect with the audience, would have been able to transport people to a different time and place to make them feel the terror of a dragon's breath or the glory of a knight's victory. This was not a passive form of entertainment. It was a deeply interactive and emotionally powerful experience. The stories themselves were often filled with archetypal characters and universal themes. The struggle between good and evil, the triumph of the underdog, the quest for a promised land. These stories provided a kind of psychological roadmap for navigating the complexities of life. They taught people how to be brave, how to be kind, and how to find their place in a world that was often difficult and confusing. The stories were a kind of moral code, a set of instructions for living a good and virtuous life. They were a powerful force for social cohesion, a way of binding people together through a shared set of values and beliefs. And here's a scientific fact that is both beautiful and a little strange. Did you know that listening to music can actually change the way your brain works? Studies have shown that listening to music can activate the brain's reward centers, release dopamine, and even change the physical structure of the brain itself. The medieval person's world was a world of music, of hymns in the church, of work songs in the fields, of ballads in the mead hall. This constant immersion in music would have had a profound effect on their minds and their emotions. Music was not just something you listened to. It was something you lived in. It was a kind of sonic architecture that shaped their reality, a kind of emotional language that could express things that words alone could not. This raises a poignant question. Have we, in our modern world, with our endless stream of on-demand entertainment, lost the deep communal power of a shared story or a shared song? We can now listen to any song we want anytime we want, but we often do so alone through headphones. We can watch any movie we want, but we often do so in the silent solitude of our homes. The medieval person's experience was a communal one, a shared experience of listening and feeling together. The story was not just a story, it was an event. The song was not just a song, it was a ritual. We have gained a kind of individual freedom in our consumption of culture, but perhaps we have lost a little of that profound collective connection. The echoes of a distant song are still with us. They are in the fairy tales we tell our children, in the folk songs we sing around a campfire, and in the epic stories that still captivate our imagination. They are a reminder that before there was a written word, there was a spoken word, a word that was passed from one person to the next, a word that was a living, breathing thing. They are a reminder that we are all a part of a long, beautiful, and ongoing story, and that our lives are just one more verse in a song that has been sung for 1,000 years. We've listened to the echoes of a distant song, a world where stories were the living archives of a people. Tonight our journey takes a more philosophical turn. We'll move from the collective life of the community to the inner world of the individual, and to a concept that we take for granted, the very idea of the self. We're going to talk about the geometry of the soul and how the medieval person's sense of identity was shaped not by a quest for uniqueness, but by a sense of belonging. Imagine a world where the word individual, as we understand it, a self-contained, unique, and autonomous being, did not exist. The medieval person's identity was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of destiny. You were not a person who chose to be a farmer. You were a part of the land itself. You were not a person who chose to be a woman. You were a part of a long lineage of mothers and daughters. Your identity was not something you discovered. It was something you were given. It was a kind of nested identity, where you were a part of a family, which was a part of a village, which was a part of a kingdom, which was a part of God's creation. The geometry of the soul was not a single point, but a series of concentric circles with the individual at the very center, but always defined by their relationship to the larger whole. This brings us to a fascinating philosophical concept that has captivated thinkers for centuries: the problem of personal identity. The problem asks, what makes you, you over time? Is it your body, your memories, your consciousness? In our modern world, we often define ourselves by our unique experiences, our personal beliefs, and our individual achievements. Our identity is a kind of scrapbook of our lives, a collection of unique moments that, when pieced together, form the story of who we are. But for the medieval person, identity was more of a tapestry woven from the threads of their community, their family, and their faith. Their sense of self was not an individual scrapbook, but a single thread in a much larger and much older tapestry. And here's a scientific fact that is both beautiful and a little strange. Did you know that the cells in your body are constantly being replaced? The skin cells you have today will be gone in a month, and the cells that make up your bones will be replaced over a period of about 10 years. You are, in a very real biological sense, a completely different person than you were 10 years ago. So what is it that connects the you of today to the you of 10 years ago? The medieval person, with their deep connection to lineage and tradition, might have a more intuitive answer to this question than we do. They might say that it is not the physical body that connects us, but the thread of our soul, the story of our family, and the legacy of our ancestors. They would see themselves as a temporary vessel for a much older and more eternal essence, a kind of living bridge between the past and the future. This raises a poignant question. Have we, in our modern quest for individualism, lost a sense of continuity and rootedness? We are constantly being told to find our own path, to be our own person, and to stand out from the crowd. We have traded the deep communal identity of the Middle Ages for a kind of spiritual loneliness, a feeling that we are all on our own, charting a course in a vast and indifferent sea. The medieval person, with their profound sense of belonging, would have a kind of psychological security that is hard for us to comprehend. They were a part of something larger than themselves, and that sense of being a part of a collective story would have given them a powerful feeling of purpose and meaning. The concept of a private interior life of a self that is separate from the community was a relatively new idea in the Middle Ages. The very concept of privacy as we understand it, a space where you can be alone with your thoughts, did not exist. Homes were small and often housed multiple generations, and life was lived in the constant company of others. This would have led to a very different kind of mind, one that was more focused on the external world, on the needs of the community, and on the rituals of social life. The medieval person would have been a master of social grace, of nonverbal communication, and of the unspoken rules of their community. Their minds would have been a kind of living social map, a place where the relationships and the needs of others were constantly being processed. The geometry of the soul was not a matter of self-discovery, but of self-placement. It was a matter of understanding your role in the great chain of being, a matter of knowing your place in the family, the village, and the universe. We have traded this ordered communal sense of self for the chaotic but exhilarating freedom of individual identity. We have become our own authors, the writers of our own stories. And in doing so, we have gained a great deal of freedom. But perhaps we have lost a little of that profound sense of belonging that comes from being a single beautiful thread in a much larger and more ancient tapestry. We've contemplated the geometry of the soul, a self defined by its place in a grand collective tapestry. Tonight, our journey takes a turn toward a more somber but essential reality of the Middle Ages. We're going to talk about the shadow of the Black Death and how the ever-present threat of disease and death shaped a culture in profound and lasting ways. It's a gentle reminder that their world, for all its beauty and its rhythms, was also a world of immense fragility. Imagine living with the knowledge that a fever could be a death sentence, that a cough could be a harbinger of a plague that could wipe out your entire family. The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, was not just an event. It was a wound in the collective memory of a people, a trauma that would echo for centuries. It wiped out a third of the population, shattered social structures, and fundamentally altered the relationship between the living and the dead. In a world where medicine was based on prayer and herbal remedies, the plague was an unstoppable force, a kind of biological apocalypse that seemed to have no earthly cause or cure. This leads us to a crucial biological concept that we understand from the comfort of our modern sanitized world: the nature of a pandemic. A pandemic is an epidemic of an infectious disease that has spread across a large region, often multiple continents. The Black Death was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which was carried by fleas on rats. To the medieval mind, this was a supernatural event, a punishment from God, or a miasma of foul air. They had no understanding of the microscopic agent of disease, and so their response was based on faith and folklore rather than science. They would hold religious processions, pray for mercy, or flee to the countryside, all the while unaware that the very act of fleeing could be a way of spreading the disease to new regions. Their ignorance was not a failing of intelligence, but a lack of a fundamental scientific framework. The constant threat of death would have shaped every aspect of their lives, from their art to their religion to their daily rituals. The art of the time, known as memento mori, remember, you must die, was often filled with images of skeletons and graves, a stark and constant reminder of the fleeting nature of life. The dance of death, or danse macabre, was a popular artistic theme depicting people from all walks of life, from kings to commoners, being led to their graves by a dancing skeleton. This was not a morbid obsession. It was a kind of spiritual practice, a way of keeping the reality of death in a constant and conscious place. It was a kind of preparation for the inevitable, a way of living a life that was both aware of its end and therefore perhaps more fully lived. And here's a scientific fact that is both a little grim and deeply fascinating. Did you know that the Black Death may have actually contributed to a kind of proto-scientific inquiry? In the face of a disease that defied all the existing explanations, some people began to question the established medical and religious wisdom. The plague forced people to observe, to document, and to try to find new ways of understanding the world. It was a powerful and tragic catalyst for change. The plague was not just a biological event. It was a kind of cognitive and philosophical one, a great and terrible test that forced humanity to begin to think in a different way. This raises a poignant question. Did the constant presence of death make life feel more precious? In a world where life was fragile and fleeting, did they savor the taste of a fresh loaf of bread, the warmth of a fire on a cold night, or the simple pleasure of a friend's company in a way that we, with our assumption of a long and healthy life, often do not? We are so focused on the future, on our careers, our retirements, our plans, that we often lose sight of the present moment. The medieval person, with their acute awareness of the shadow of death, may have been an expert in the art of living in the now. They would have known that every day was a gift and every moment was a miracle. The great plagues of the Middle Ages were a kind of cruel teacher, a force that taught humanity about the interconnectedness of all life. They learned through the harsh lessons of death that their actions could have consequences that stretched across communities and continents. The plague in its terrible power was a kind of involuntary lesson in what we now understand as herd immunity, a concept that was far beyond their grasp, but whose effects they saw firsthand. They saw that a community that was wiped out by a plague was a community that was no longer a threat, a kind of brutal natural quarantine. The plague was a kind of reset button for humanity, a force that both destroyed and, in a strange and terrible way, rebuilt the world. We've walked in the shadow of the Black Death, a world where life was fragile and fleeting. Tonight, our journey comes to an end. We're going to draw all these threads together, the whispers of the past, the rhythm of the seasons, the language of the loom, and the architecture of belief. We're going to talk about a dream on the verge of waking and how our slow journey through the Middle Ages can teach us something profound about our own lives, right here, right now. Our journey began with a simple question. What if you lived during the Middle Ages? And as we've traveled through time, we've seen that the answer is not a matter of knights and castles, but of something much deeper. We've seen that the very fabric of their reality, their understanding of time, of the sky, of their own bodies, and of their place in the universe, was fundamentally different from our own. They lived in a world of profound silence where every sound was a signal. They were in a constant tactile conversation with the things they made. Their knowledge was not stored in books, but in the powerful living library of their own minds. Their sense of self was not a matter of individual identity, but of a deep communal belonging. They lived with a constant awareness of the shadow of death, and in doing so, they may have had a deeper appreciation for the simple fleeting miracle of every single day. This journey has been a kind of scientific and philosophical thought experiment. We've used the distant past as a mirror to reflect on our own present. We've seen that our modern world, with all its comforts and its certainties, is not the only way to be. We have traded the cyclical time of the sun for the linear time of the clock. We have replaced the profound silence of nature with the constant hum of our machines. We have exchanged the deep embodied knowledge of our hands for the shallow abstract knowledge of our screens. We have traded the communal feast for the individual meal, and in doing so, we have gained a great deal of power, but perhaps we have lost a little of our soul. This is not a call to go back. The Middle Ages was a world of immense hardship, of disease, of superstition, and of injustice. We would not trade our antibiotics for their herbal remedies, or our democracy for their feudalism. But it is a call to remember. It is a call to remember that there are other ways of knowing, other ways of being, and other ways of living. It is a call to remember that we are not just a collection of individuals, but a part of a long and beautiful human story. And that the echoes of that story, the echoes of a distant song, are still with us if we only know how to listen. There is a final scientific concept we will touch on, one that ties all of our discussions together: the human brain's neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. It is the brain's incredible capacity to adapt and change in response to new experiences and environmental demands. The medieval brain, shaped by oral traditions and tactile crafts, would have been a profoundly different physical organ than our modern brain, shaped by literacy and digital technology. The very wiring of their minds would have reflected the world they lived in. This is a beautiful and humbling thought. It reminds us that we are not just passive observers of our world. We are an active and ever-changing part of it. Our brains are a living record of our lives, a tapestry woven from every story we have heard, every tool we have used, and every breath we have taken. And here's a final mysterious thought, a truth that science has yet to fully explain. We are all connected across time and space by the simple fact of our shared humanity. The medieval person's desire for love, for safety, and for meaning is the same as our own. The joy they felt at a new harvest is the same as the joy we feel at a new success. The grief they felt at a loss is the same as the grief we feel. The emotions, the hopes, the fears, these are the threads that connect us all. They are the invisible lines that run from their time to ours, from their world to our own. And so our journey through the Middle Ages slowly fades now like the last light of a distant candle. We gently pull ourselves from the silent, star-filled nights and the world of human-made things, from the shared stories and the communal table. We leave the fields and the cathedrals behind, and we slowly return to the quiet of this very moment. I'd like to gently ask one last time, where is the place you're staying now? The time in that place at this very moment, how is it flowing? Let yourself feel the weight of your own body, the softness of the sheets, the simple, reassuring reality of the now. Remember that you are a part of a long, beautiful, and ongoing story. The past is not just a distant land. It is a whisper in the wind, a faint memory in the marrow of your bones. Take a deep, gentle breath and hold it for a moment. Then let it out slowly, like a soft sigh. Thank you for traveling with me tonight. If you feel so inclined, you can leave a small thought, a final word from your place in the world, down in the comments below, a gentle closing to our shared journey. Sleep well, my companion, wherever and whenever you are. Sweet dreams.